Oh, hey there. So this video is going to be a bit different from the vlogs that I usually do. See, for my post-secondary, I actually studied anthropology, philosophy, and sociology mainly. And so I thought that with this YouTube channel and these videos I've been making, it would be a good way to kind of combine that with my musical background and see what kind of things I can come up with. So let's get into that. So let me start this video by asking a question. Have you ever been into this like really cool niche underground band and you really enjoy watching them progress and make like these new, really artistic, acclaimed albums, only for them to kind of 180 at some point and they release this really crap commercial mainstream album and it goes super successful? Like, how could they do that, right? So we're going to talk about selling out today. So the selling out that we're talking about is usually what happens when like a band or an artist will sort of dilute or make their once edgy underground sound more easy to digest, a little more mainstream, usually with the goal of attaining more financial commercial success. And I do agree that artists can definitely take decisions, artistic decisions that is, to sort of achieve that goal, sometimes with more or less success. But I also want to challenge that definition, and I want to argue that it isn't just up to the artists. I think it also has to do with how the artists and the bands are perceived by their fans, and also how they're marketed by the entertainment and culture industry. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first, I think we need to talk about what we mean when we describe a band or an artist as being like alternative, indie, underground, whatever synonym you can think of that just basically means not mainstream. So from a sort of artistic point of view, some of the characteristics we might think of are generally that music is probably less accessible, doesn't appeal to quite as wide an audience, and it might be for reasons like the music being more complex, could be more raw, or it could just be downright offensive. In contrast to that, when we think of mainstream music, it's usually pretty easy to consume or to digest, whatever term you want to use. And it's usually designed to be that way. It can be very hooky, it can be very catchy, and in some cases it can even be kind of addictive. An easy example of what was once an alternative style of music is grunge. It's really abrasive, aggressive, and unpolished. And from a sort of musical evolution point of view, grunge really came in the combining of punk and heavy metal together. Ryan Moore describes the sound of Nirvana, who's probably the most famous grunge band, as being unpolished, coarse, and featuring incoherent vocals. And like in my opinion, Nirvana is also the most mainstream of the grunge bands. So most grunge bands are actually kind of worse than Nirvana in how abrasive and rough their sound is. So at this point, if you're not a fan of alternative music, or you kind of agree in my description that it's hard to listen to, you might be wondering, like, what the heck is the appeal with it then? Why do people listen to this music if it's not easy to listen to? Well, I want to suggest that the reason doesn't have to do so much with music and actually has more to do with identity and belonging. So essentially, what I believe makes part of this alternative music appealing to people is the chance to kind of build your identity around it and join or belong to certain groups of people, which we're usually going to call subcultures. But what's a subculture, you ask? Simply put, a subculture is a cultural group within a larger culture, but that subculture usually has beliefs or ideals that are at variance with the larger culture. That's a bit abstract, but you can think of examples of subcultures, such as in North America, being things like biker gangs, goths, punks, or more recently even hipsters. Usually there's a desire within a subculture to kind of try to distinguish yourself from mainstream society in some way. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I do think that subcultures can really help people find places where they can find acceptance and belonging where they otherwise might not. But to go back to that element of distinction, that's usually done through stylistic and consumption choices, such as what kind of clothes do you wear, how do you style your hair, what kind of music do you listen to. For example, if you're part of a biker gang, you might know that Harleys are the only way to go. Or if you're a punk, maybe you really value DIY, do-it-yourself ethics. And if people call you a hipster, maybe it's because you listen to a lot of really obscure indie music. The important thing with being a member of a given subculture is that you have to know what's cool and what's not. You have to listen to the right music, you have to wear the right clothes, and maybe you have to drive the right kind of car or something. But the important thing is also that what is cool is probably not being promoted by the mainstream media. You have to find out about it some other way. You know, maybe you got a recommendation for your new favorite band from your best friend that only listens to really obscure bands. All of this is really important so that you don't get labeled as a poser. You know, you have to be a real punk or a real biker. You don't want to be a fake. This knowledge about what's cool or what's hip that lets someone kind of display their authenticity in their subculture is what Sarah Thornton calls subcultural capital. Basically, the idea is someone who's more authentic in a given subculture has more subcultural capital, and someone who's not as authentic, who's like a fake, they're a poser, they have much less subcultural capital. Subcultural capital basically lets us distinguish the real punks from the fake punks, or the real bikers from the fake bikers. This term, subcultural capital, is also based on an older term called cultural capital by the French theorist Pierre Bourdieu. And if you're familiar with his theories, this whole idea of subcultural capital is probably making a lot of sense to you right now. But in case you're not, I'm going to quickly run through that concept as well. Cultural capital refers to non-material goods, so things like educational credentials, verbal skills, certain types of knowledge and expertise, and aesthetic preferences. And the important thing is that these things can be converted into economic capital as well. Also important to note that music and the kind of music you like falls into aesthetic preference. You'll have different cultural capital sort of depending on the circumstances and what you're exposed to as you grow up. For example, let's say your family really enjoyed like a lot of high class type things when you grew up, say classical music, opera, really abstract art, really fine dining, then you'll probably have an easier chance to at least understand how those things work compared to, say, someone who maybe grew up really poor and didn't have the chance to be exposed to those things. So subcultural capital is kind of the same idea, but applied to subcultures. And just as we perceive certain kinds of cultural capital to be higher status than others, we do the same thing with subcultural capital as well. So, for example, I know that in my group of friends, we probably wouldn't think of the band Weezer being super alternative or edgy or innovative as compared to other bands like Soundgarden or Korn or Mastodon, even though you can kind of generally group all those bands under the very wide umbrella that is alternative music. So another important thing in all this, especially for the high status insiders, is that it's really important that they don't seem to try too hard, and they've kind of acquired their knowledge of what's really cool and what's really hip in a sort of mysterious, almost natural way. It's very important that they don't look like they're trying too hard and it just comes to them naturally. So let's go deeper on the idea of subcultural capital. And again, this is sort of the embodiment of knowing what kind of music to listen to, what kind of clothes to wear, how to style your hair, etc. Now we know that we can use it to distinguish between the real, authentic insiders, like the real punks, versus those who are trying too hard and are pretending and are not authentic, the fake punks or the fake bikers, whatever. That same sort of distinguishing factor can also be exploited by the entertainment and culture industry when they market it towards the mass consumer market, literally selling them that idea of, hey, if you do this cool new hip thing that all these guys in that subculture are doing, you can rebel against the mainstream too. So Ryan Moore puts it really well. He says that for the same reason that an insider's style will be imitated in a given subculture, that subcultural capital can be marketed by the entertainment industry to consumers who want to seem versed in the latest thing. And that's the same thing with like alternative or edgy music as well. So what happens then when like an indie band who has this cult following gets really big all of a sudden? So like, let's say maybe you were into Nirvana before they got big and they had just released their first album, Bleach. You're really proud to be a fan because like literally no one knew who they were. And then what do? They go and release Nevermind. It sells millions. They become huge. They've basically sold out. Now everyone knows about them. So this is what Ryan Moore calls the liquidation of subcultural capital. All that subcultural capital that had some sort of value to you now has no value because everyone knows about Nirvana at this point, and it's no longer edgy or alternative to like them because that doesn't separate your identity from the mainstream anymore. Nirvana can't be alternative if they are now the mainstream thing. So for better or worse, what happens is that these fans, or you, if you were a Nirvana fan like this, will probably try to reestablish those boundaries between the real fans and all of the new fake poser ones. You know, you might say things like, I listened to Nirvana first, or, well, you guys are just a bunch of bandwagon fans now that they're popular. It's like the same thing as when the Toronto Raptors started doing very, very well in the last couple of years, and all of a sudden the whole country of Canada is a Raptors fan. And it's quite understandable that you would try, or a fan would try, to reestablish those boundaries, because the culture industry in making Nirvana or insert other indie band very, very big now means that you can't use your appreciation of them as a way to distinguish yourself from everyone else and build your identity. Well, I hope that you've seen through my explanation of this that subcultural capital can essentially serve as a sort of status marker, status signifier, status symbol, whatever you want to call it. And that because of this factor, the entertainment and culture industry can use it to market it to other people and profit off of that subcultural capital. And the fact that listening to a certain kind of band or a certain indie band can be within that subcultural capital, that means that the entertainment industry, the culture industry, they will try to profit off of that band and the fact that it's considered alternative or edgy. And that means to market that band, to make them really, really big, have them, or previously have had them, sell a whole bunch of records so that you could make a lot of money off of that band. So as much as musicians and artists can make a conscious choice to maybe make more mainstream art, I think another big part of the whole selling out thing comes from the record industry, the entertainment industry, really pushing these alternative bands to become big and to become famous. And so a part of that isn't necessarily up to the artist either. I think this also really highlights the tension that's created when you're an artist as a career and you make your living selling your art. You know, part of it is relying on it to make money, but you're probably also very passionate about your art and want to evolve as an artist. Artistic ideals are really, really commendable, but sometimes those ideals don't necessarily put food on the table. Simply put, these are some of the grapplings that come with the commodification of art. So that pretty much concludes today's video on musical selling out. I hope that you enjoyed it. I really did enjoy making it. I also really need to give credit to Ryan Moore and his 2005 article entitled "Alternative to What? The Commercialization of a Music Scene." If you have access or you have some way to read it, I really do recommend it. It's quite a fascinating read about the commercialization of the San Diego music scene. And this is back when San Diego was kind of touted to be the next Seattle after grunge became really, really big. This was like right after grunge became big, and the entertainment industry was trying to figure out where can we go next. In any case, if you did enjoy watching this video, please take a second to like, to subscribe, hit that bell so you'll get notifications. And I also would really like you to let me know what you thought in the comments. Let me know if you liked the video, if you liked the idea for the series, and if you have any ideas for topics that I should explore. I'd really like to know about those too. My name's Gab Lavoie, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.